Well, let's start. um, Big welcome to my webinar about the secrets of sacred geometry. Um, it's going to be quite a big journey. But to start, I want to invite everyone to go into a little practice embodiment to become more present, more in the body with the teachings I have to give today. And I want to invite you to stand up. And just make sure that your knees are slightly bended. And let's just take 3 deep breaths for ourselves to own what is happening inside of our own body. And I want you to take a moment to be aware of gravity, which means what you feel as your own weight. How heavy are you? And how heavy can you feel? And allow like this weight from the top of your head, for example, to feel the weight, how it is pushing on your neck, on your chest and shoulders, on your diaphragm and organs, on your stomach, belly, on your hips, on your thighs, on your knees, on your underlegs, ankles, feet, and the soles of the feet where you're having a contact with the floor. And how gravity is still passing through your feet and is entering the earth and going towards the center of the earth. The center of the earth being the same center that everybody is sharing in terms of gravity on this planet. And recognizing that you have your own individual vertical line passing through you in its own ways to that center. And at the same time, I want to invite you to, recognize that our planet is a sphere. It has also geometry. It has an intelligence. It is not a cube or a pyramid, it's a sphere. And that's a unique geometry for this intelligence, embracing every life form. And I want to invite you to see yourself, let's say in a conceptual manner, to see yourself as a sphere, to imagine that you have a sphere around you, 360 degrees in all directions. And I want to invite you to feel the openness of this shape. Every direction is equally easy to access. With that in mind, let's just open our arms and, follow the Da Vinci picture of the man, as we are also drawing a circle with our arms, and we can reach towards the heavens and pull ourselves and have a little stretch. You can move in the way you would like to stretch your own body. And with that, you can take a deep inhale and trickling down slowly the high energies, and to bring them down. And you can bring your hands in front of you and slowly bring them down, down, down. Allowing yourself to be that conductor for those high energies, to be a channel. That's it. I invite you back into your chair. Mm-hmm. And whoever joined, very welcome. If you feel like showing yourself, that would make me very happy. Like this, I have a feeling with whom I'm interacting with. Hey, great. So, sacred geometry. I want to give a little introduction about my journey with sacred geometry. About 4 years ago, I met a light language teacher, and the form of light language that I was taught is based on sacred geometry. So three-dimensional geometry, and you can see here on the left, we are creating grids like this. And so it's three-dimensional polyhedras, and we combine them with colors. And there is an intelligence of spirals also within the system. And it really blew up my mind, because I finally got in touch with a language that really resonated with me to the edges of my being. And it really got me curious to research more, because I felt such a strong truth into it. I felt the need to also make it visible that it is true, to make it more palpable and more, some kind of term, scientific, for everybody to understand how it works. Nevertheless, what I'm presenting, although I've been inspired by many people, and I will share the sources from which I've gotten my information, it's not a presentation to prove anything. I'm just sharing what gives me joy, and what I have found and what works for me. So I would love to go into a discussion if you have questions. By the way, if you have any questions, just write them down. That would be the easiest way to reach me while I'm explaining. And the emphasis of this webinar is to show how sacred geometry teaches secrets, instead of seeing sacred geometry as a secret. So, sacred geometry is a mirror of creation, teaching us the mystic laws of creation. So, what is mysticism? Mysticism refers to the belief of a direct experience of the transcendental reality or God. And the transcendental reality, that the absolute and the relative can be experienced as one. This would be somehow an explanation that makes it a little bit more accessible, the terms what is transcendental or what is God, because actually everybody has a different experience or relationship with whatever we might call God. I will also explain why. Well, what does this mean? These terms are very difficult to understand because it is conveyed through a relative way, which are words. Like we are talking and I'm like making sound and you're trying to interpret what I'm actually saying to you. But sometimes we say things and the other one doesn't understand what we actually wanted to bring across. So words sometimes they lose meaning, and that's kind of difficult. And this is mainly also what is happening in the world with religions and what have you not in our every aspect of life. So anyway, what is meaning? Meaning is the denotation, referent, or idea associated with a word or a phrase. So meaning, as I've been saying, like I have a meaning and I try to convey it, and then the other one hopes I hope that the other one will understand it. So meaning means there are two subjects, and it's important because to realize that there are two. It's a relationship that we're building. So what does the world mean to you? When we're talking about meaning, we can get lost with all the little things, but if in a general context, everybody has a different association and relationship with the world, which is similar to this idea of God. But to what do you associate the world? So now we're having this, now I'm inviting you basically to realize that, okay, there is the world outside, but who is then the second subject to whom you're associating meaning? Any guesses? It's you. So if we differentiate the self from the world, what is the self? And it is this inside perspective, the subjective, where you produce your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, the place where you make a choice. And here you can see this image of it's called camera obscurus. It means a black chamber. And this is basically how cameras are working. You have light in one room and you make a tiny hole. And just when you have a tiny hole, then it will create a clear image on the other side. If the hole would be bigger, it would get just blurry and you wouldn't really see. And it's really amazing to see in the past how some people, they could calculate amazing things in the world in terms of calendars, and they were way ahead to what mainstream data was believing to be true in that time. So if we look for the mystical experience, we're looking to merge, fusion, and unify the subjective self with the objective self. Interesting. How does sacred geometry play in all of this? How does sacred geometry teach the mystic laws? The fact that the subjective world and the objective world have a relationship indicates that there must be a bridge. So, who says bridge? It's the structure. Who says structure? It says geometry. Who says geometry? Plus the unification of what we're looking for, that's sacred geometry. So we're getting a better understanding of what sacred geometry is. So what is that geometry that is bridging? That's what we want to find out. We must acknowledge that since we're talking about bridging the visible with the almost invisible, we need to find a bridge for both, one that is visible and invisible. Let's have a better understanding what the subjective and the objective perspectives are. So, very important beginning. Nothing can be described directly. The unity of all things can only be described as indescribable, a self-contradictory description, but even ordinary things cannot be described directly. Yep, because the moment you describe something, you limit it, and you actually are not in the direct experience description of the event being. What are describable are the attributes of a thing. A being has attributes, but a being is not the attributes. Attributes are divided parts of a being, not the being itself. So here you have a model which is nice to have a kind of idea of what it means. Coming back to the idea of God, for this reason, every living creature can only understand unity or God to the extent to which it itself is able consciously to experience, manifest, and realize unity. That is to the extent to which it itself can be unity. So we're like, whew, answering a big question about, the previous thing of how can we experience God? Wow, it's really up to you, and it's your responsibility to actually get there. It's not out, it's you. So I've put here a beautiful circle and a line because these are symbolic symbols of infinity. So it's either the infinite line or it's just a circle. The unity can be divided into any number. The number of divisions signals the kind of divisions. So, duality is found everywhere, classically called the objective and the subjective. The two parts of duality each relate to their complement, like time and space. Everything has both objective and subjective extensions into time and space, and is on the diagonal of both. Objectively, all things are different from all other things. There are either at different times or place or both from each other in the concrete measure of all things or events, which are the same thing, an event of being. Subjectively, all things or events are similar to all other things in the abstract perspective and process of being. So here we have a little graph where you can have dividing the idea of objectivity and subjectivity, with also the regards, it will make a little bit more sense later, of the cross and the parallel, which for the cross, it's perpendicular, so it's different from one another, whereas when it's similar, then they are parallel to one another. All things are endlessly similar to all other things, and all things are endlessly different from all other things too. So we're having here a paradox at the same time. We can, for example, we can look here, we have a man, a stone, and an ant. The man and the stone is more similar to the ant in terms of weight, but the ant and the man is more similar in terms of biological complexity. So we can always play with perspectives and see different things. For every entity, there is the self and the not self. Both the self and the not self make exchanges in their own realm and in the other realm as well. So we can see here, I'll let you read it for yourself. From the self to the self is the subjective universe, and you can see the rest. Similarity means similarity to the self. Hello, I see another video. Super nice. Difference means difference from the self. Just to make clear what we mean by similarity and difference. The concrete is the quantity of qualities. The abstract is the qualities of quantities. All things resonate to different degrees in the concrete and in the abstract, that is the objective and the subjective. All things are both objective and subjective. Objectively, all things or events are different from all other things, yet all perspectives or viewpoints share the same pervasive, repeatable physical reality. Subjectively, all things or events are similar to all other things in innumerable ways. Every entity has its own unique subjective reality. For example, spoken words as one form of communication can have a huge range of responses in people, but not directly affect fragile objects at all. But a thrown rock as a form of communication would have a more concrete effect on fragile objects, but the effect on people would likely be less complex or subtle. All interactions have objective and subjective components. Objective reality details the universe that can be measured. There must be a physical change. Subjective reality has changes that are only indirectly physical. An opinion on who the villain and who is the hero can change with more information. Now, when you divide a unity into 4 parts, one reality you get is mass, energy, space, and time. going to another concept of what unity could be. Einstein's full equation reduces down to the famous E equal mc2 for objects at rest. Further, simple algebra shows the four objective elements of existence, mass, energy, space, and time, as a proportional array as simple as 1:2 as 5:10. The four elements of existence can be seen on an even footing. Each element is defined in terms of the other. So here you can see energy divided by mass equals squared space divided by squared time. So we can really put them next to one another and see the relationship that they have to one another. In this universe of mass, energy, space, and time are the field of action. Every object in the field consists of both mass and energy together. In all cases, even though only observed as one or the other, ever, all things exist as a dichotomy of mass and energy in a continuum of space and time. So we see here, there is always in life, there is a dichotomy that objects are either energy or they are mass, depending on what you observe. And there is always this interrelationship of space and time that is always continuing no matter what. The speed of light is just a finite limit. Objects exist at speeds lower than light and all different mass to energy ratios. Mass energy objects exist as particle or waves that move through the field of space and time that they create in their energy mass relationship. So here you have the objects. It's either a wave or a mass particle. Field of action. The three axes of space. You see here the three axes of space. We have length, width, and depth. They're mutually perpendicular to one another. And that is usually also a way how scientists think about what will be then the next dimension. Because in 3 dimensions, there is no more space to add a 90-degree turn. But there are some ideas that I will share. Just like space, there are actually 3 axes of time, but they are parallel to each other, not perpendicular. They flow along together. So here you can see that you have one axis here, one axis in the middle, and one axis on this side. Events, like the existence of objects, occur in the past, the present, and the future. As waves, all objects in the present resonate with each other to exist as standing waves. I will explain a little bit better what is a standing wave. The resonant energy of objects can reflect upon the past and project into the future. Resonating in the dynamic and constantly changing present is the event of being. All things resonate with all other things. Being is the change. Being is having resonant interface with all other things in the here and now, which is motion, and processing those changes in space and time. No change means no existence in the present. All things have the ultimate goal of continuing to be and do the actions that further that continuation. Energy waves occur via or on opposing tensions. That is a standing wave, but I will explain it again. Resonant waves exist in exact numbers of waves per space. That we'll explain right away. So, but this is a funny thing, how every moment has a past and a future in our time. You can see different perspectives of time frames. Now, Max Planck was forced to conclude that energy is gained or lost in discrete units, like changes in waves per space. So we have to understand that from this perspective, we're talking about quantum physics. So what that means is, like, at some level, there is no more like a 1.2. It can only be in full numbers. So like waves on a string, there will be a number of waves. So my wave here that I've drawn, I'm having just one full wave that is doubled. And it cannot be 1.5. That wouldn't work. And here you have another picture of instead of having a 2-dimensional, I turn it around into a sort of a 3-dimensional, although it's of course 2-dimensional. Energy emissions in the electron shell of an atom proceed along understood intervals of resonant stability. Atoms emit all excess energy down to their base vibration. So when we are looking to the atoms, you have the molecules and then you have the electrons spinning around, but there is only a fixed number of electrons for each interval. So there are different depths or like rings, levels of rings that they can have, but there is only a certain amount of energy that is in those rings. When there is too much energy, they can either expand their rings, but they will only expand to the right amount of what is needed for the big ring. And when they decrease, they go smaller and they follow again a certain path. And they're not like in between. And that is also like the same meaning of there are discrete units. It's not a 1.5, it's either 2 or it's either 6. I have to check with the numbers because I would love in another presentation to make a relationship, because actually the Platonic solids are actually translation of these discrete units. It's amazing, but basically that you can already see that the geometry is dictating basically those patterns. Anyway, here the Feynman diagram depicts exchanges from one specific object to another, but it allows for infinite objective variations in that path of exchange from one object to the other, each with its own probability. This is the Feynman diagram, and this is actually how they calculate when the electron is leaving and coming back. Music is the management of energy. Resonant progression can soothe or energize through various tensions and potential paths to resolve the tonic base. Objects manage energy through harmonic resonant intervals, units of change for resolution from tension. So as you can already hear, there is like this relationship that we're setting between music and quantum physics, because it's like a string on the guitar. It's again those discrete units. It's it's not random. There is really an order, and there cannot be too much of out of the simple numbers. Entities harmonize musically to resonate their being and have a perspective on all resonant structures. Resonant interaction is the music of being of each thing with all other things. Resonance is a standing wave which can be straight or curved. Two standing waves can be parallel or perpendicular. All right, so what is a standing wave? A standing wave is, you have to imagine that you have two walls, like a guitar. You have where the cord is attached on one side and on the other side, and only because those two sides are attached can waves happen on the string, and it can be stabilized. Standing waves can be straight and reflected with the tension of linear opposing forces, or circular and projected with rotational oppositional tensions. So here you have the picture of straight, and here you have circular. Perpendicular and parallel waves can be in phase or out of phase. So here I'm having this little picture. Here it's perpendicular. And I will repeat this later, but it's somehow very important. Imagine that you have a force going up and on the side at the same time. If you would have those two forces at the same time, what happens? You get a diagonal, right? You just push up and to the side at the same time, and what happens? It goes in diagonal. So that is in phase. They're like going together. And if they're out of phase, like here you see underneath, you go first up, and then you go to the side, and then you go down, and then you go to the side. What happens? It becomes local. So the energy starts to become stuck at that specific location. Whereas when it's in phase, it's going forever. And there is nothing, when it's in phase, it just continues. That is why there is the term global and local. And with an interesting connection with our objective and subjective The two waves going in two directions of motion resonate with each other. In both, they're positive and negative expressions of competition and cooperation, destructive and constructive interference. These are like the technical terms. As competitors, the objective and subjective oppose each other at 180 degrees. So it's either or, I'm pulling this way or I'm pulling this way. They're competing with one another. And as cooperator, the objective and the subjective engage each other at 90 degrees. And here you can see that wherever you go, you will be always objective and subjective at the same time. So you're working with both forces. You're not working against. And here we can see again the camera obscuris, how it's inverting also the image. And to recognize that the world is experienced only truly as a reflection of the self. And this is the invitation of how we can upgrade our perception of what the self is. So the me, the I that becomes an I, when justice becomes what just is, when immunity becomes I am unity, perspective dictates patterns of resonance perceived. And this is what I hope actually to share. Patterns are structures of energy. So to observe means to resonate. Resonance is a reinforcement and a persistence in undulating. Persistence means being attuned to resonate with the whole. Entities that do not resonate do not persist. This is somewhat the concept of consciousness. So what is consciousness? There needs to be an observer, the way of observing, and the object, the observed. The observer, the way of observing, and the observed. There is a fixed beginning, there is a moving element, and there is a fixed end. And I put a quote of this book, Initiation, if you know it. The recognizer, the recognized, and the recognition are one and the same. The self, the creator, recognizes itself in itself. Man can only experience God in this way. God in his state of resting within himself is 1 in 3 and 3 in 1. 1 and 3 are still an unseparated unity. And we can symbolize it as a triangle, but it's in its essence, it's really this dimensionless principle. And when that consciousness starts to manifest itself in time and space, it starts to become the number 4. It becomes 3 and 1. It's not 1 in 3 and 3 in 1, but it's 3 and 1. So we're adding. And you can see how we can divide a triangle and suddenly we have 4 triangles. And when we fold them, we get a tetrahedron. Tetrahedron has also 4 corners. And it manifests in the 3rd dimension. So I want to invite you into a little journey of dimensionalization. So imagine beginning of the creation of creation. It's pitch black. There's nothing. It's just pure nothing. But suddenly nothing realizes that it is something. And by realizing it is something, by the experience of having something other than itself, creates a separation, creates a movement, creates a line. The one can see that a point through time becomes a line. And suddenly, like going through that, suddenly the vibration starts to, like a string going up and down, suddenly realizes that it also can turn. And it becomes a surface. So when we have a line, a point through time creates a line. Now, if we have a line going through time, you get a surface. Now, a surface through time creates a cube, the most basic shape of 3 dimensions. And length, width, height. And what happens now when we shift the cube through time? Luckily, we have computers that like try, not that try, that succeed to visualize a 4th dimensional cube. But we have to understand it in our 3rd dimension. It's impossible to see it. So we are creating somehow a visual, and it looks quite mesmerizing. This is a 4th dimensional. So we have to play through time, right? But it's really amazing to see how, objects in 4 dimensions look like in 3 dimensions. And one can already understand that when it's a cube going through time, it means that a 4th dimensional cube has the intelligence of the past and the future of the 3rd dimension. It starts already to have godlike properties and intelligence because it knows the past and the future. It knows what will happen. You can ask questions and you get the answers. That being said, it already becomes an interesting stepping stone as to creating mystical experiences, or where to look for mystical experiences. Now, I want to present another model. I have to confess, I'm still studying all this material and it's huge. And I can only give a brief explanation of what it's all about. And I hope in the future to create webinars or classes that will be much more detailed about it. But now I want to give you another concept of how to present the idea of dimensionalization and the creation and the story of creation. So for that, I will just read a little text. In the beginning, our universe is made up of field energies arranged in harmonic octaves. The greatest of these octaves energies is the realm of God. A single point and continuum, also known as one spirit, or all that is, or mind, or any name people choose to honor the totality of life. From this singular mind of power comes a system so perfect, so mysterious that none of us can fully understand it. This grand law of creation begins with a simple division of energy, a point and a sphere, respectively a contracting force and an expansive force. The division of one is now in creation. We live in a one self-creating, self-dividing universe among a multitude of universes. No thing, no action, no life, no idea is separate from the one universal time, space, point, and continuum as it emanates in divine balance. All is a function of one in symmetric expression. From this system arises the study of alchemical law, which is the study of sacred geometry, in my opinion. One has created a spatial sphere that continues to radiate and a center point that continues to contract. This is the first division of the one. The second division shows the grand sphere divided into 2 halves, each with a compressed sphere and a center point. I will show you. The continuum divides itself continually in halves with center points and radii paths that are all interconnected. Each division is an octave, a group of resonance speeds. The first division shows the points and the sphere to be equal and opposite in direction and in force. The idea of equal and opposite is something I'm going to show you. So we see the first division, we see a point and a sphere. The sphere is always expanding and the point is always contracting, and they're equal and opposite in force. So it's the same force that is contracting than the one expanding. Now the second division looks like this. Sorry, that's not, that's still the first division. But sorry, I jumped ahead. So the expansion is the space field and the contraction is the time field. Space field is the kinetic expression of mind. The time field is the potential expression of mind. So here we have the second division. And time and space are always attracted to go together, but yet they're always opposing one another. And the time field paths, so the sphere is expanding in a, the space field is expanding in a sphere, and the time field is going from the surface to a line to a point. And the time field paths are like highways of energies. So all interactions are happening, not all interactions, but the expansion of those spheres are all happening on time field paths. And here you can see in the image, when it's dividing, you have one half which is predominant in the time field and one that is predominant in the space field, although they both have their own time field and space field spheres and time field point and space field, although that's how it divides itself. So in union, the space field and the time field form one. Third division, it's dividing like cells, and the smaller ones are smaller octave from the bigger octaves. And when we expand basically these spheres and points, one starts to get interesting bubbles everywhere. And when they are harmoniously together, one starts to get shapes like squares. Here, if one just takes the radii of this sphere and one intersects here one, and we take the same distance and same distance, one starts to see a six-pointed star, which sometimes is referred to the Merkaba. And you can see that those different octaves, they work like a piano, the octaves. So it's always doubling or halving. So it's just to give you an understanding. I know it's brief, and another time, or like I'm still studying and I want to finish the manual before I can really explain everything about it, because it's quite a different perspective of what what we're used to see in science, mainstream science. But I want to already give you this beginning of understanding that there is a natural unfoldment, and that creates geometry from a simple sphere and a point. Anyway, little picture. And what unfolds is the flower of life that we see. And one can see as well, here we have the Sri Yantra, but it's a two-dimensional representation of a 64 compound of tetrahedrons, which is basically the another aspect of the flower of life. If I would give a crude analogy, one could say this is more a male perspective, more angular, and here we have more a female perspective. But I don't want to get too much into that. And we have a three-dimensional flower of life, because actually we're looking at two-dimensional spheres, but it's three-dimensional. And here you can see one axis, two axes, but there is a third axis missing in the picture. So it's also not a full flower of life, but it's just to give you a little idea. I thought it was cool. So we are used to, in our mainstream science, to talk about general relativity on one side, and then we have quantum mechanics, where, you know, things don't actually match up together, and it's like two different worlds. And like, I believe that there is a unified theory. There's something that can unify all of it. And I figured out that actually in quantum mechanics that there's actually enough information to bridge it all, but somehow mainstream science doesn't want to follow up with that. Who knows why? So I want to start with universal laws, because this is something that is found within many tribes around the world. In Egypt, it was called the Hermetic laws. In Alice Bailey's material, there's amazing description about those universal laws. And they're all, basically every law is like a fractal of all the other laws. Every law speaks for all the laws. So one could say there is only one law. Although with the theosophical material, they divided it in 105 laws, and it's just amazing to read it all. But easy version from the people who know Bashar, he pins it down into 5 laws, which are super easy to understand. The first law is you exist. Cannot do anything about that to change it. Everything is here and now. Cannot change anything to do that. And it gives us the feeling of oneness and being. Third law, what you put out is what you get back. Gives us the experience of reflection and attraction. The all is the one is the all. Gives us the experience of separation and connection. Everything changes except the laws, which gives us the experience of action and experience. So for me, it was important also to have this picture here where one is dividing all those different levels of worlds, where basically the universal laws, they apply to all of those levels. There is no separation. And this is really laws somehow that is passed down through I would maybe say not acceptable mainstream science ways. Anyway, but we get to what we do know, or what we have found out is a length or a level of existence, which is the Planck constant. And it's quite an interesting level for our reality, because there cannot be a distance smaller than the Planck length in terms of what is observed through light. So if there would be something closer than the distance of the Planck length, reality would kind of collapse and create a black hole. And so it's not actually possible to have something smaller than the Planck length with the stuff that is making our universe, of our energy and mass and whatever vibrational frequency reality we're living in. Yes, but at the same time, to have a little understanding of what this Planck distance is, it's so small that imagine that the Planck length would be the size of a grain of sand. Sorry. What? If the Planck length is equal to an atom, a grain of sand is equal to a galaxy. Usually I get it straight away. Now I have a block. Funny. Anyhow, this is the number. I will also explain what is this. So who is familiar with frames per second? When you're watching a movie, it's a film strip that is happening. And it's one image after another, and you just put them quite fast after one another, and you start to see a movie. Usually we say that after 25 images per second, or as we say, frames per second, the brain doesn't recognize anymore what goes beyond that. One doesn't see, but I would argue that you can still see quite a few more frames per second. Here you have an animation of what the difference would be. I'm also not 100% sure if it's fully accurate because of the translation of files and internet and blah, blah, blah. But we're talking about 15, 30, 60. Now, imagine that you would have Planck times. And how much Planck time can you put in 1 second? This is the number that you can put in 1 second. It's billions and billions and billions of images. And so this is what I discovered, is that that is what time is, or how we experience time. It's so many static realities next to one another that as a consciousness, as a dimensionless consciousness, we're shifting through. And that is giving us the illusion of movement and time. So it says already really a lot. And I wanted to just put it out here, this idea of like you're having a static image and then another static moment. Basically, you have a certain choice and you create parallel realities. And you just have many, many, many possibilities through which you can shift in which other static parallel universe you want to shift into. So we already live in a 4D shape translated in 3D perception. So this is somehow the biggest aha that I wish to bring more over, is that for having all those static images already next to one another, it's like we have seen before with the hypercube, the fourth dimensional cube. It's a constant shift, and there is something keeping it all together. There is already a shape through which we're constantly shifting through. And I will show different fourth dimensional shapes to inspire each other. It is a sequence of parallel reality that we call parallel reality. So it is a direction of parallel reality. But they all exist at the same time. You can choose any path through them. So now we're again playing with time, as suddenly the perception of time in one level is not the same perception of time in another level. Whatever you decide yourself to be at that moment is the sequence of parallel realities you set up for yourself. But creation doesn't change. The whole set of all those frames are not changing. Only the reflections of the hall of mirror change, not creation. Time is an illusion, change is an illusion, but the experience is real. I don't know if you've seen this movie, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And she's shifting to another parallel reality with that device she's putting on her head. I found the movie really funny and cool also to open up our minds for parallel realities, because it's something we're capable of doing. We just forgot. Anyway, I wanted to give you again this idea of time, because I was just saying somehow in this phrase before, there was this different idea of they all exist at the same time. So you're saying there are two futures at the same time. That's what I'm saying, yes. So we are already living in the fourth dimension. And when I say fourth dimension, I mean 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time, which creates 4 dimensions. So when we shift or when we record our reality on a movie, we are seeing suddenly 3 dimensions. So 2 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time. And the interesting thing is that we often represent time as a one-dimensional line through which we can shift right and left. But for me, what was interesting was the idea that you can actually translate 3 dimensions onto 2 dimensions. And we all accept this. You're looking at me at 2 dimensions, but usually like an animal doesn't really understand a screen or something. They don't have that feeling, but we have no problem to interpret our reality through a screen. Anyhow, I wanted to continue the idea to translate it onto a one-dimensional line. And one can see that space and time are just mirrors to one another. There is no difference. And one can see that actually time is the creator of dimensions. And time potentializes movement, inertia, space, and dimensions. So one can see that just when there is time, it gives that potential of every dimension possible, infinitely. Time as an illusion asks us not only to understand and embrace the structure of reality, but also to live consciously through it physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. How can we relate to hyperdimensional patterns? For me, it was important also to bring something for you to make it more visceral and to make it more of a day-to-day acceptable reality, because just talking about the concept makes it I don't want to keep people stuck in their minds. So 4-dimensional space-time viewed from a perspective of changes in 3-dimension is like passing a 2-dimensional plane through a 3-dimensional object. You may see different resonant symmetry depending on perspective. So this is one of the most important things I feel also to really understand. Is just look at the images, it speaks for itself. You just pass a plane through, and in the beginning you just see a point, and then you see a triangle, you pass it through the cube, and then you see suddenly the 3 here, the 3 points, and you pass it through, you see the other 3 points, and you pass it through. And this is somehow how we can translate every upper dimension into our dimension. So we make representation, we take snapshots. Maybe later I will say as well that what is also interesting is that sometimes 4-dimensional objects might sometimes not appear in our reality, but maybe it makes more sense later. I will continue. Perspective on reality can differ and still both be valid, such as, you know, oh, I see just this point. No, I see this point. So who's right and who's wrong? Both are right, such as we can see in this image. With motion and constant changes in perspective, there will be constant change in the resonant interaction between things. So what can we observe through 4D plus time? What we often hear is the 5th dimension, that we don't observe through 3D and time. So what happens if you have a cube in the 4th dimension? You would be able to see the inside and the outside. You would be able to see everything that you can do through time. So you could see the inside and the outside. You could see through walls. So you can see other possibilities, probabilities, potentials, other timelines, because as we said before, you know, if we look from the 5th dimension, the 4th dimension encompasses the time of the 3rd dimension. So you could see the past and the future. Other locations, beginnings and endings, parallel realities, Schrödinger's cat alive and dead, both can exist at the same time. A 3rd dimensional being flexible, physicality being bendable, because in that sense, yeah, time and space, they start to connect and start, if you would look at that, it would see. Anyway, seeing through the fifth dimension does not mean seeing all of the fourth dimension, such as we don't see all of the third dimension in our universe at once. You don't see probably the stars right now if you're inside of your house. So here I'm having some more pictures of hyperdimensional figures. Although this is arguable because this is still a three-dimensional, it's a torus. But some people say this is maybe a fourth dimensional sphere. And here we have some perspective about the dodecahedron being in its next dimension, how it kind of would look like from the inside. And this is animated. And it just keeps on moving and moving in our perspective, because that's how we can translate the dimension. Or we have this one. And here I put an image, which gives us a little bit this idea of the frames per second, of how every moment, every Planck time is being projected the light in our reality. And here we have some other perspective of what we see, as well as the fractality. Oh, maybe I have to, there we go. And we can see the torus within the torus, within the torus, within the torus. And for me, the question was suddenly, what if fractality is a symbol for even higher dimensional resonance translated in our universe? Because we were saying before that a line through time, a point through time creates a line through time creates a surface through time creates a cube through time creates the experience of inside and outside. That was also the idea for me of the torus, because we have a inside and we have an outside. But what if now we would put this inside outside through time? What if seeing from the sixth dimension, one would see basically fractality? So this suddenly really opened the big door as to, wait a second, in our reality, there is already the translation in nature of even higher dimensional intelligence or shapes that are translating in our third dimension. Boom. It is a sequence of parallel realities, what we call parallel reality. It is a direction, what we call parallel reality, but they all exist simultaneously. From the 0 point, your definition sets the direction. Chapter closed, new chapter opens. The science of imprinting, simulation, and memory. Taking a little step back. To symbolize is to embed, getting the hologram inside you in phase with the hologram outside of you, the origin of psychokinesis. Again, with this idea of getting the subjective with the objective in phase together. How come we can associate meaning to symbols? So here I've put the nervous system, the circulatory system, and the brain. It's all playing a big role in our ways of associating meaning on so many levels and how it imprints us. Like computers, our systems store, recognize, and manage information based on a binary system. What is the self and what is not the self? And like the 0 and the 1, that's how all our hard disks, our computers are managing the information. And funnily enough, we have the circle and the line, like the two infinite symbols. What allows imprinting in your being is the attachment you give to it. Here I've put different pictures of how moments leave an imprint in us. You can have, for example, a big argument and it just, it stays with you for quite some days, or just a gentle touch, or a simulation. You're playing a game and we have this ability to completely go out of our own emotional state and enter into a whole new world with new characters and new friends. And you would only give the attachment to what is sense making. And an attachment can also be synonym for meaning, or an attachment of information. So what is sense making? To what are you attaching? You're attaching to what you recognize as being you. You are, in a sense, you are trying to always expand your sense of self. Who are you? We had opened the subject of cooperative and competitive interference, standing waves, which are two waves going in two directions of motion, resonate with each other in both their positive and negative expressions of competition and cooperation, destructive and constructive interference. As competitors, the waves oppose each other at 180 degrees. As cooperators, the waves engage each other at 90 degrees. So here I've put this image, which I found also really interesting. Projection and reflection can both appear in the same space. Imagine you're between two mirrors and one sees itself projected through the mirrors and reflected, with the idea of projection being the future and reflection in the past. Just an analogy of how, again, every single moment contains future and past. Anyhow, we were talking about the idea that waves can be in phase or out of phase. Cooperating, going perpendicular, in phase and global, and out of phase and local. And I wanted to present the idea that we have the aspect within us which would be more, which is usually more recognized as being a subjective side of us, which would represent our soul. And the soul has these qualities of being infinite, eternal, omni. They're not stopped. And we have then the physical self, body, which is finite, limited, and localized. And with that, I wanted to put that in comparison. The nature of our physical reality is incompatible with our soul's reality in nature. Although, taking a big step back, you are your soul. You are an expression of your soul. Definitely. Every single atom is an expression of your soul. But one can see that the expression is happening in a dichotomy, whereas the soul is a continuum. So here we have a better graph of how we understand. So when they're competing, you can see that the red line is making a circle, it's on a place, and when it's together, it's creating a line. And so I put this, who are we? We are the body and we are the energy. And although we are living in this dichotomy of, oh, I'm on the one side, I am this eternal being, and oh, I'm also this finite being. We're both of them. And yet, when we are aware that we are both of them, we can unite those two sides of our being under consciousness itself. What are the parameters you gave yourself? You are an infinite being who chose to experience a finite experience. I thought it was interesting to put some resonance idea Your soul is a continuum. Here, the frequency, if you notice experience, you just vibrate a fork, and the other forks, if it's the same fork, it will just tune with it, although you didn't strike it. Ooh, is there a question? Why can I not see the chat? Sure. Yes, you can see the replay. You will see it on my page on Facebook. So your soul is a continuum. Your physical body is a dichotomy. Here, the fork. Your physical body is incompatible to your soul, yet can reflect through rhythms, cycles, tunings, densities, timings, the eternal harmony your soul embodies. So just take it lightly. The idea of incompatible to your soul, it's quite a rough terminology. Only when two waves are out of phase can they create a local experience. We often search the identity to be as concrete as possible, but your identity, if your identity were to be hyperdimensional, you would be everywhere in the lower dimensions. As such, this exhibits similar qualities as a global experience of two waves in phase. So I thought it was interesting, no? If you would be this hyperdimensional being, you would be in the future and in the past, you would still be the same identity. And therefore, you would be everywhere. You would not be localized to what would be localized in a lower dimension. One way to acknowledge higher dimensional patterns is by recognizing that we have senses that bridge the inside with the outside, not by using sight, but the sense of touch. We can also feel resonance. In fact, here is a model that might describe easily comparison. But for me, it was really important also to recognize, when we say the next dimension would be to feel inside and outside. What would it be like if you would perceive from that higher dimensional perspective? You would feel, you would know what the other person is feeling inside. Quite a psychic idea, don't you think? Buckminster Fuller saw two triangles become a tetrahedron. For him, a triangle exists in 3 dimensions with overlapping vertices. This is the holistic minimum of information. I thought this was really genius of him to think like that. You put 2 triangles and you get a tetrahedron. You just have to overlap them in the next dimension. In a flow around the triangle, one aspect of these triangles is best expressed by M.C. Escher visually. The opposing bistable resonance is uphill in one direction and downhill in the other direction. So when we just take one triangle, in one triangle, one has let's say the subjective and the objective already within it, has it as a potential. And one can also see it as within, so one can see in one triangle that the objective and the subjective are competing against one another or are cooperating with one another. And combining those two triangles, the objective and the subjective, I thought it was interesting to make a little comparison of the two. So in the field of action, which would be time and space, being as an objective value is more recognized as a feeling attribute from the subjective perspective. Doing is knowing, having is resonating, having being really this action, doing something, and resonating is the action on the waves. And similarly, when one is viewing it from the dichotomy of objects, I resonate a little bit stronger with this graph, where objectively energy would be information subjectively. Information objectively would be mass subjectively. Mass objectively would be energy on a subjective level. Thought it was really interesting to see how this dichotomy is always playing, but instead of competing with information, we could cooperate. This brings us to this idea of mechanical and moral positivity and negativity, to make a clear distinction of what is positive energy as a mechanical perspective and positive energy as a moral perspective. Positive energies can be described as unifying, bringing together. Negative energies can be described as segregating, separating. All things stand as a neutral phenomena in physical reality. Some things bond through positive mechanical energies, but have, maybe, a negative moral factor. As such, I'd like to highlight our choice to engage into constructive waves interference, meaning in cooperation with reality as moral positivity, and our choice to engage into destructive wave interference, competition with reality as moral negativity. To remind you, you always have the power to define the world. It's your choice whether you're making it as a constructive event or a destructive event. And that's really up to you to, that's not defined, that's you that defines it in this very moment. Continuing in sense making, there are different gradations of meaning, depths of prints at different levels. How deeply are you touched by life? How much do you allow yourself? How much do you allow life to have an effect on you? How much do you touch, participate of, or in life? So just some questions to activate somehow, where am I? Your system as a barometer of plasticity, yeah. So this idea was like, which was, I found really interesting from this guru, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the founder of Transcendental Meditation. He was talking about that in the beginning, when your nervous system is not so much trained, certain events leave a trace in your body, like you would slice through a rock and you have a scar for your whole life. That's the experience you're having. But when you're training your nervous system and you're allowing to experience, you know, the global energies of your soul, one starts maybe to experience it less rough, in that sense of like, it's like sand. You're ripping through sand and it's still leaving a trace for some time, but it's possible to just clean it out. And then at some point, it's like you put it in water, you know, you slice in water and you see the waves rippling, and then it's nothing. And at some point, even air, it just passed and you already forgot that it passed. It didn't even matter for you to have an imprint on you. This gives this idea of hard and soft, again, this dichotomy of local and global. How much do you own your life? If you are to be, you must behave what you are to be. Star Fuentes is the lineage holder of the light language community. Owning all levels of reality, honoring all levels of your being, allows you to shift more readily into more of who you really are at a spiritual level. So this is really a big thing, you know, of really owning whatever you're feeling, not discarding things, seeing the light and the dark inside of you. And I'm writing inside of it, you know, to shift more readily into more of who you really are at a spiritual level, because I believe that the spiritual level is the most difficult level to embody. I mean, embodiment means spirit in body, and to live basically that mystic experience at all times, it becomes a living day-to-day reality. And here I've put again this analogy of energy is information. Energy objectively is information, subjective information, and the objective is mass. So there is always this comparison, and it's always like, okay, you know, am I cooperating with everything? Am I going to make something constructive out of my life or not? And why would I prefer to not make something constructive with my life? Owning the dichotomy of our physical experience and behaving in it as a cooperative continuum, because we cannot escape the fact that there is constantly this dichotomy. And again, it's actually adding diversity and abundance. And here I've put a little image of how one is having always this local experience, but although we are living in this local experience, we can have a constructive experience. Now, talking about the hard and the soft, do we know what matter is? Because matter is usually the hard part. Scientists today are still facing a deep uncertainty as to what matter is. I've read that somewhere. Thought it was really funny to just read like scientists say, oh, actually, we don't know what matter is. And you're just like, what? Is that so difficult? Well, it touches actually a subject that is sensitive, and where that is like something I was talking about, that like mainstream science somehow doesn't really want to accept certain researches that has been made and don't want to pass on and accept that there is actually proof. And proof about what? Proof about the ether, also known as the unified field. So I was raised up through community, you know, transcendental meditation, and this is like the usual graph that they explain. You want to learn transcendental meditation, they show you this, and they show you on the one side of physics, you know, we have the upper, it's the more the grosser, more concrete expressions of reality, and then we're going to mechanics, and then we're going every time smaller in the size of events, and we're going to quantum physics, then we're going to you know, the size of the atoms, and then we go smaller and smaller and smaller, and well, a good group of people, you know, agree that there is a unified field and that something is emerging from there, but it's like generally it's accepted as it's a theory, and it's not, doesn't mean that it's reality. And on the other hand, so the Maharishi was speaking about that our consciousness can, through the practice of transcendental meditation, experience the deeper levels of reality, and also touch basically pure consciousness and unified field where one is experiencing one with everything. Anyway, ether means made of the same thing. I didn't know that. So why is it not accepted, the ether? Because in the 19th century, the Michelson-Morley experiment, it's just an experiment. This picture, what I'm showing you, is much more recent, but it's using actually the same technology, where they found for the first time gravitational waves, but it was basically using, it was sending light through those huge tubes, and here as well, and they were calculating how much time did light travel from here and back, because there are mirrors and they're like inclined at a certain degree. And basically back in the 19th century, they were like feeding, like they knew everything about physics, and that they were ready to, you know, crack all the secrets, and they just had to prove that the ether existed. And so they made this experiment and they couldn't prove it. And so since then they were like, it doesn't exist. But in the meantime, so maybe before I say a but, in the meantime, Einstein like released his theory about general relativity, and this was like a big thing and people loved it. And this kind of set a rest in peace for the ether idea, and the whole idea of general relativity came up. But so everybody accepted this idea of general relativity. 20 years later, Einstein said, like, my theory of general relativity can only work if the ether exists. And nobody listened to that. We just discarded that. We don't find it interesting. We just take care about what he said first. And it's, I don't know, it's bugging. And throughout time, other scientists redid the experiment because basically the experiment wasn't perfect. So they changed certain ways of how they do it, and repeatedly with different scientists, they found actual results. And they did find that the ether existed. But yeah, somehow, don't know why. But it's important to also question, why do we need the ether? Philosophically, it is difficult to define nothingness. I am not going to read everything right now. But one of the important things is, like, we need a medium for light propagation, because we don't know actually through what light is propagating. And well, nowadays in quantum physics, we say it's vacuum, it's nothingness. We need a conducting medium for lines of electrical and magnetic, but it's the same of light. We need a propagating medium for electric and magnetic waves. Ether explains stellar aberration, still things that we otherwise cannot explain. We need to establish a frame of reference for measuring absolute motion. This is quite a big thing because our experience of time is always relative. I don't know if you're aware of this idea of people, if somebody would be traveling at the speed of light, he's experiencing just normal time, but he's traveling so fast, you know, he's going from here to there in like a few seconds, and he's coming back. Let's say he's traveling 15 light years one direction and straight away going 15 light years back. For him, it was 30 seconds. For us, it was 30 years. So time is behaving differently depending on how fast you're going. But then there is this discrepancy. We're living in the same universe, but still, like, the experience of time is different. So the faster you go, compared to the others, you're experiencing less time. So there is always this comparison that is somehow bugging. But what is the absolute speed? And what I can say from what I know is that the time is set by our black hole. That is the main master of time for our galaxy. And so time doesn't behave the same in another galaxy. And that is what the research was about, and what they have found is basically that speed that the galaxy is setting. And indeed, we need an explanation of gravity. This is a big one as well. Einstein's spooky action at a distance and Newton's curvature magic are unacceptable. As Conrad Ranzan states, a cosmology that is missing a complete theory of gravity cannot claim to be a modern science. Reginald Kell explains gravity as self-dissipating contractile process of ether space. In other words, gravity is an inhomogeneous flow of ether, quantum foam to cohere into matter. Anyhow, this is starting to get also this a little bit more complex. And this is, again, for me, what I'm sharing with you is I feel it's already much more easily digestible, but unfortunately I'm still studying, and I'm facing also difficulty to make it very easy to understand. The compressibility of ether is an important aspect, as it plays a pivotal role in the process of gravitation, electromagnetism, and mass. Because this is one of the findings that they have found when they found the ether. They found that it has the quality of being compressible. It has also another quality of being defined as being somehow superfluid. It has also another quality as to every point in time and space is connected to one another and is able to influence one another. Anyhow, compressibility is defined as the measure of the relative volume change of a solid or fluid, in this case the ether and a superfluid, as a response to a pressure change. The compressibility of ether causes waves to form. The pattern of the way waves pass inertia in the ether has only one shape, the sine wave. The sine wave is just this: up, down, stop. That's the normal, just a very boring wave. And that's the only wave that exists in the ether. That's the only shape that creates all the rest. When a wave in the ether moves in the line, it is called energy. When the same wave is sucked into a circle, the slight gyroscopic resistance to change of position is called matter. Okay. This wave being sucked into a circle means that a standing wave is formed. All matter is actually a standing wave of ether. So what it's saying is basically this. What you're seeing here is the only thing that is happening on the ether. So when there is this motion happening, and when it is starting to become local, what I've explained to you, when the two waves are out of phase and it's starting to make something local, it starts to actually create a tornado as a shape. And because of this tornado, you can see that there is symmetry. And when it's seeing that once matter is being created, symmetry has to happen. To say that a substance is compressible means, among other things, that it can store momentum. Momentum is defined as the quantity of motion of a moving body measured as a product of its mass and velocity and the impetus gained by a moving object. Momentum has a rush to grow. The momentum of ether involves movement in symmetrically opposing direction, which means a standing wave is possible to happen. So what is the ether? Ether is the basic substratum of all space. Ether is the raw essence of the universe. Ether permeates the innermost recesses of all matter. Without it, the universe is contrary to nature, contrary to reason and common sense. Without it, the universe is utterly absurd. So basically, this is what is happening. The ether is literally the compressibility of charge, which behaves like a superfluid, like a plus and a minus. This is electromagnetism. So because of the compression is creating plus and minus, which is the compression and the rarefaction of ether. I will explain you more what compression, but basically compression would be like the lines and the rarefaction would be in between. Compressed and opened up. Now, again, I don't have enough information to make it more easy than this, but these two opposite electric conditions which form the basis of the constitution of matter are the compressed condition of gravity, pressure, and the expanded condition of radiation pressure. These two electric conditions are the equal and opposite pressures which make motion imperative and without which motion is impossible. These counter forces, when balanced, are the pressures that create stability. The stability of pressure is matter itself. I mean, I'm repeating myself. Remember, all is motion. Even matter is motion. However, when these forces are balanced, they create the illusion of stability or stillness. We see unmoving matter, yet within the matter, all continues to be motion if we look inside of it. This means the universe is made of nothing but stored pressure, or in other words, potential. Because if everything is moving, it must be stored in something. When the pressure or charge rotates, what we have been talking about, it concentrates and stores inertia, the definition of mass. And that rotation has a period, the concept of time. Acceleration of inertia is translated from rotation into compressional spin towards center, which accelerates spin rate, the experience of time. That is why acceleration causes time to speed up, because of the translation of vorticity. So it's like if you have this donut and you like turn it and you push it in, if this force is going to basically, if I would do it on myself, my fingers push my hands forward. So it has this pushing effect. Yeah, and more than that, I have difficulty to explain. Acceleration is gravity. That was the definition that, I mean, that was almost the definition of Einstein. He was more speculating, and he was saying like there is no difference between an elevator just going up and what gravity is, as the change of weight is changing. The experience of gravity is charge acceleration. Charge rotation spin rate is time. Mass is the inertial rotation that stores charge. I'm repeating myself. Time is the period of that rotation. It is spin rate. When spin rates superpose non-destructively, they enable compression. Remember non-destructively? the opposite of destructive, competitive. So when it's only cooperative, they enable compression. Dimensions is only a name for the number of axes of charge spin symmetry that are superposed. The key is to recognize that only golden ratio allows you to superpose more than 7 axes of spin non-destructively. I will get more into the golden mean. But what is interesting is that in a tetrahedron, one has 7 axes of spin. All those lines, it's not super clear, but basically you have the 4 corners, which are 4, and then in between, in the surfaces, you have 3 other axes, which would be the 7 axes. And you have here this other representation of having those 7 axes, and the torus, the golden mean spiral is drawing torus. I know it's a little bit fast, the information, but this would be some pictures of how the spiral, and also I'm jumping ahead because it's basically what scientists called Dan Winter has found out, is that only the golden mean ratio spiral based from the Planck length is the only way that one can enable non-destructive compression. It's the only way we can compress infinitely. There is like no end for the storage of information, which I want to hint now that this is basically the bridge. This is the beginning of how we can go further than 7 axes of spin, 7 dimensions. It's like a doorway to go even to the 8th dimension. So here, this is a model of how gravity, so gravity is acceleration, and it's basically never stopping. So it's the same as that compression of that spiral. And when it's going in, like a torus, it's going out, as you can see on this picture. What is going in is going out. So one way, gravity is pulling it in, and on the other way, what comes out is radiation. It's emanating the light. And here you can see basically this is a map of having 7 colors next to one another, but they're all touching one another, and they can only touch all touch one another when they're put into a torus, which is also an interesting comparison. This is the golden mean ratio. The golden mean ratio is A plus B. A is the double of B, and that creates the next one. So if A plus B would be C, then one can say A then A plus C would equal D. Sorry, I'm not very clear right now. Talking a lot. Anyhow, what I want to say as well is that because the ether talks in symmetry, the most symmetrical shapes are the language of the ether. And here I'm showing you actually what we learn in our light language classes. This is the shapes that we learn. We learn actually the most symmetrical shapes. And you can see that it can get super complex or very simple. A little introduction, what is transversal waves? This is also a little better understanding. Transverse waves are waves of alternating shear stress at right angle to the direction of propagation and are present in solids and the motion of the electric and magnetic fields in an electromagnetic plane wave, which both oscillate perpendicular to each other, as well as the direction of energy transfer. But what it means, transverse waves are going up and down. You see the red dot? It's not moving to the right or the left. It's just going up and down. Here we have also cool animation. And you can see that one wave is seemingly two waves because of the standing wave. And here another video. This is a transverse wave. Now a longitudinal wave is what is usually understood as being sound. Sound is propagating like this to right and left. And this is creating compression and rarefaction. What we have been just talking about, the ether. So what happens, this is how you hear sound. And so the little hammer in your ear is the medium that is telling your nervous system what kind of sound you're hearing. So it's going from right to left. And this is longitudinal waves. And this is, for example, a plane going faster than the speed of sound. I find it fascinating. Phase conjugation. So this spiral that we were talking about, this golden mean spiral, through perfected, like in laser technology, knows how to do that perfected cooperative wave interference. And that's how you create a laser. It's through this kind of mechanics, and there is like mirrors, and one is like a half mirror and one is a full mirror. And you can see these spirals, and it looks like pine cones kissing noses. Gravity is the acceleration of charge because it's non-destructive. It continues to compress. And what happens from transverse to longitudinal? I will explain that once again. So we have here again that golden mean spiral. And you can see actually, you can see it in 2 dimensions and all of these. You can see the golden mean spiral. And actually, it's going in one direction and in the other. Actually, nature found out that you can put the most seed in a surface by following the golden mean proportion. So this spiral, what happens is that it actually shifts the transverse to the longitudinal. So this spiral is basically sorting out and is creating order in our universe. Through following that compressional, through following gravity, you're actually having the up and down, which at the finest level would be still light, and you put it into order, you push it with longitudinal. And that is the amazing thing, how this spiral is creating that. I would like to say it's actually inviting the universe to go hyperdimensionally, to go into more of a hyperdimensional order. Now, consciousness chooses speeds of reality. What makes sense? In electronics, a phase-locked loop is an electronic circuit or a voltage or voltage-driven oscillator that constantly adjusts to match, lock in onto the phase and frequency of an input signal. In the case of ether science, consciousness is the controlling oscillator that allows the output to match the input, creating a stable standing wave or not. The point is, consciousness is the controller. So what I'm trying to say here is that remember how many frames per second we have? And how different perceptions of time can exist simultaneously. You are deciding, it's from your perspective, which time frame you're focusing on and which reality you're actually living. So resonating. There is a fixed beginning, there's a moving element, there's a fixed end. That's creating a reality. Like a standing wave. So when I say don't think about a pink elephant, what do you do? And who thought about a tiger? Who thought about a turtle? You know, this is how your consciousness is locked onto a reality. You can directly, you know, shoot certain ideas which actually block others. And you're very easily, you're drawn into a reality that you haven't chosen, or consciously chosen, to be more accurate. It's important to understand, oh, my slide. It is important to understand the need for resonance. Because of resonance, we're able to dictate perception. Through containment, focus, concentration, or slowing down our attention on a specific intention, every word or even letter is able to be up-programmed. So as we were talking about, like, giving attachment to what makes sense to you, we're able to even put more meaning behind certain words. We're able to layer even more energy in just a simple word. I would like, for example, to share the idea of denial. Denial, I really like this idea that you can separate every letter and it would be translated as, don't ever notice that I am lying. Yeah. Denial. So, and whenever I hear the word denial, I think about this phrase and I'm like, whoa, where am I lying? Resonance is a pattern in movement, and pattern is a structure of energy. Energy plus movement is energy, and movement is emotions. So, emotions. We're coming a little bit more viscerally into the subject. Okay. So I'm putting here like this idea of overlapping structures, having 7 dimensions, 6 dimensions, 5 dimensions, 4 dimensions, how emotions, being then this conscious perspective of a reality that is creating those feelings that you have inside of you. There is a parallel between emotions and light. They both mean energy in motions. Emotions are not positive or negative, but a vibratory system that either resonates or dissonates with other systems. Adjusting to higher dimensional emotions. Woohoo! Emotions is already a term that describes sometimes phenomena that exhibit higher dimensional definitions because they involve a result that can only happen through time. Of course. Although there are also emotions that describe energies, emotions from lower dimensions. To my perspective, peace, synchronicity, resilience, dharma, love, purpose, faith, impeccability, etc. are emotions that are above third dimension, and they would have each a respective geometrical pattern in 3 dimensions. And maybe not. Maybe there will be even more. For example, caring is great, but caring too much can be detrimental. Therefore, true care will be multidimensional. Peace is a quality that requires a greater understanding of the dynamics in the 3rd dimension. Therefore, peace is not a 3-dimensional process in its nature. To be realized, peace has more of a state of being attribute than a circumstantial one. True peace is also to experience peace in the middle of a war zone. The number of emotions are not limited. They're infinite in combination. This is pretty cool as well in light language. When you learn the 5 platonic solids, all other forms based on the most symmetric forms are all stemming from those 5 shapes. And here I'm having some examples. This is, for example, a great stellated dodecahedron. Here we have this is a great dodecahedron, something like this. You can hear in the names, it's using the same names than the platonic solids. Emotions are not divided. A deeper study into their mechanics reveal essentially a unifying force, unconditional love. And by the way, I've been hearing from Bashar as well that physical reality is basically the translation of unconditional love, with which I want to actually um, uh, associate the idea that emotions, because they flow in our universe, they're actually rooted on the longitudinal waves. Yet, as we add and multiply these simple mechanics, things can get complicated, and having technical models or structures will help us reveal, untie, and understand our true nature. In which shape are you rolling in? So what is your state of consciousness? What is the emotions you're in which kind of structure are you living your life? Here I have this cool GIF from Contact, the movie, and she's floating in a dodecahedron, and she is traveling in a wormhole. How does space affect inside and outside? If your boat is really great because you can float, you know, and we know, like in churches, how all those geometries, I mean, most of them are constructed on specific sites. There is a basis underlying all other shapes. What is the tapestry the universe is made of? So this is a way of how we can draw basically the shapes. Here you can see the line, the square, the cube. But then we can even go further, and we can draw, for example, the fourth dimensional cube, a tesseract. You can, for example, dissect it by seeing here you have a cube, and here you have another cube. I mean, you can see actually many cubes in here, but they're all connected. And actually through this way, we can easily draw, not in the 3 dimension as I've shown you before, but in 2 dimensions, we can draw hyperdimensional shapes. Here you can see when you go 1 dimension up from the tesseract, you go 1 dimension up, 1 dimension up, 1 dimension up. This is then the 8th dimension. And here you have how it is drawn for the other shapes. You can see the platonic solids here above, and here you can see the platonic solids in the next dimension, which is quite funny because in the 3rd dimension you have 5 platonic solids, in the 4th dimension you have 6 platonic solids. And here you can see the hypertetrahedron. The tesseract, as we have shown, and so forth. And by the way, if you look to this symbol, this is a symbol which is used a lot into magic rituals. And I will explain you why later. Anyhow, through this way, I heard someone say that poetically, this would be the eye of God, 8th dimensional shape. And as we've seen before, 7 axes of spin, if you follow that spiral, you go even further. It's the only doorway to go even in another dimension. Here you see what that spiral. Come on. If you dissect that spiral and you multiply it, this is what some refer to as the Holy Grail. And when you follow that spiral, what is amazing is that the platonic solids, like the spiral would follow this point and then would go on to this point and then would go on to the next shape. And here you can see which shapes these are. So you have oh, it goes fast. So you start with a dodecahedron, then to icosahedron, then to a cube, then to a double tetrahedron, and then the octahedron, which is in between. But you can see that the distance between the dodecahedron and the icosahedron is through a great small stellated dodecahedron. And this idea of having this torus, it's like one flow of the torus is pushing the next flow, and is pushing the next flow, and is pushing the next flow, is pushing the next, and you get this idea of fractality, which is completely blossoming. which is kind of like what our heart does. In our heart, we create that. And I was also really amazed to see that actually the heart is just a flat tissue, and actually blood flows like in spirals in it. And that's how it, I'm not taking so much time to explain it. I feel the time is really approaching and I have to finish. We have, so the heart is the muscle through which it receives this information, this higher dimensional information. And you can see here 7 spins outside, 7, I mean, here it's 8, but I believe there are 7 spins on the outside, 5 on the inside, which would be 12, the number of the dodecahedron. My proposition, my suggestion that fractal embedding as a sign of hyperdimensionality, which, you know, you see in seashells and beautiful cauliflower, or Russian dolls, our auric fields, again, a representation of our hyperdimensionality. And the idea of the higher mind, so that there is basically a parallax. We have a parallax with our 2 eyes, and because of this we can see depth. We can see, we know when to catch a ball. But basically there exists also a parallax between your higher mind and your heart, creating basically our reality. And the higher mind is sending information to the heart is sending information to the mind and to the brain, and the brain is sending it back to the heart. And it's like a feedback loop, and you can imagine it like your heartbeat. And my proposition as well as an idea is basically the information that we receive from the higher mind is going through this spiral, is going into your heart. The heart sends it to the brain, depending on your beliefs, whether you are in a constructive wave or in a destructive wave, you send it back to your heart. And your heart is then, with your higher mind, is basically creating the reality, the holographic reality that we experience. Now, a little introduction. What if a symbol could convey more than 1 billion words? Did you know that this spiral is actually the root of our own language? Is the root of Hebrew? Is the root of Arabic alphabet and the Sanskrit alphabet? They all knew it already. Why don't we know it? And yeah, that's it. Spiral, the path of least resistance. That's my proposition as well. The torus with all those knots, I won't go into detail now. So this is our bridge, this is our power, this is our doorway to mysticism, and sacred geometry teaches this secret. Thank you very much for today's webinar. This is my webinar about sacred geometry. Wow, I managed. I finished 1 minute before. Okay. Well, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Of course, I want to say that I'm giving those light language classes if you're interested to get those downloads and to be in connection with lineage, an unbroken lineage from Mexican shamans that have basically passed down this knowledge generation to generation. And yeah, I think it's the best thing to learn.
Okay. Well, if I can say something, it's excellent webinar. And I'm into like language for some years now, and geometry and all this.
Nice.
And the way that you described it, like the flow of the information in this really concrete and practical way that at the same time every step that you explained gives has its parallel in our emotions, behavior, spiritual way of being. So it's all so beautiful, actually.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
I
so
soak
so
in this
beautiful.
compliment. It's like, wow,
Yes, yes, and you gave so
goosebumps.
much good information that I kept a lot of notes actually during your things that I want to go back to because it helps. When you're really in the other part of the world, even though I have studied mathematics and stuff like that, but it's always a good way to ground information. And
Yes.
with light language, when you download, yes, you do the different levels, but the download never stops there. So it helps grounding. And as we raise the frequency, because this is all it, hyperdimensionality, as you spoke,
Mm,
we need to keep grounding, keep
yes.
grounding.
Yes. Yes.
So I found it like really interesting in your seminar, like this
Yes.
grounding
Because that's
ability.
that
Yeah.
is was exactly like actually today I was talking about, how consciousness dictates the patterns of resonance, and that
Mm,
somehow, we can shift our idea, but my original intention was actually to ground a different reality, to actually
yeah,
ground the reality that, first of all, you are hyperdimensional. We are living
exactly.
this three-dimensional experience, but we already have the ability to know the inside and the outside. And this is like life-changing, I think. Yeah.
You said it clearly that
Mm.
anytime, here now, you shift your resonance, you shift the reality that you are grounding in your here now. And
Yes.
that's it. It's all about resonance frequency. Where you put your focus, you resonate, you bring that information here, you ground it. So choose your reality, like take that responsibility, focus, choose your frequency, do it. It's here now. It's like simple. You
Yes.
said it in
Yes.
many different ways. You said it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. It's really a pleasure being here today. Really a pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Really.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions?
It's a lot to digest, It's
Yeah,
things
it's
that,
so
yeah,
much.
yeah. And when you were saying at the moment, like you were getting lost a little bit, what you said, I emanated a yellow Taurus for you.
Oh, thank you, sister.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's
Love it.
stars everywhere. We meet each
Mm.
other through stars.
Mm.
Yeah, because
Thank
yes, it's
you.
too much to explaining to put words when you are in both worlds.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
overwhelming actually. It's not confusing. It's
Yes.
you're
Yes.
there swimming.
Yes. But this is like also the beautiful thing is like
Oh,
just through time, step by step, you take
mm.
one step and you learn, and you you automatically will only take what makes sense to you, and step by step you can add up all of this information, and it's a time again to ground and ground this information in your body, and then you know it, and that's the beauty.
Yes, and you said that too, like what makes sense, what
Yeah.
makes gravity in our reality. So expand the what makes sense to expand reality.
Wow. Yes.
So yes, you said that too. I would totally recommend for the rest of the people that are here to start their path in light language. To start
Yes.
with the first, start putting geometries on their chakras, then go to the second level, like take control of your reality, create, because
Mhm.
we are geometry. Like the shamans of the yaki, they see the geometry on the people, on your fields.
Yes.
It's like it's here now. So
This
Star
is,
has
by the
brought us an
way,
amazing tool to like take control, and we even have
yes.
a computer program for that. So it's amazing.
Yes. Which,
We
by the
have all the
way,
tools.
that's a very that's another thing I wanted to share. Just as you said, some people see it, and I had the chance to actually see it once myself. And the experience is exactly as I've described with you, this idea of parallax. So, you know, whether something is far away, your eyes, you know, they look further, and when it's closer, they look closer. So you have this shift of focus that is happening. And this was my experience when I started to see the light language shapes. It is a shift inside of you that feels like that. You're shifting your focus as if it's like a depth you're changing. But I guess that the analogy that I'm showing about that it's from your higher mind and your heart, and that from there you're changing your focus. You're able to shift to that frequency where you're basically resonating with the ether and seeing that fundamental, you're resonating with that fundamental level where suddenly you're seeing the laser-like nature, laser-like nature of light, where light language resonates from. Yeah.
What was the name of that movie that you had mentioned? You'd mentioned a movie.
Everything, everywhere, all at once.
Have you ever heard of the movie The Point?
No, sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's an animated type movie from a one-dimensional world, and how people would look to, or what it would be like for people, for them, the one-dimensional, trying to have interact with two and three-dimensional. Anyhow, it's called The Point, or you can Google
Wow.
it.
This is perfect. I'm going to watch this. Thank you.
Yeah, it's called The Point. Yeah.
Yeah, and this helps us so much to relate with we talk about extraterrestrial, but we also talk about extra dimensional beings, and it helps us to relate with extra dimensional beings. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well,
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, thank you as well for joining. I'm really grateful for your presence, because it really helps me to ground. You know, otherwise I have the feeling I'm talking to myself, and then I'm like, why am I talking to myself? So yeah, thank you so much for being here and allowing me to you know, that you act as a grounder for me to share what I have to share.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you. Oh.
Thank
Till
you.
next time.
Thank you all. See you next time.
Yes.